Welcome to the 𝙐𝙣𝙡 podcast. This series focuses on elevating and inspiring women and girls into or to remain in the tech sector from the classroom to the boardroom. I'm Kelly 𝙐𝙣𝙠𝙞𝙣, founder and CEO of 𝙐𝙣𝙡 and host of the show. Thanks for joining us today on the 𝙐𝙣𝙡 Women in Tech podcast series. Today we'll be speaking to Holly Mather, Engineering Manager at 𝙐𝙣𝙡. Holly completed a master's degree in materials engineering at Swansea University. She started her career as a research engineer in the field of metrology. After progressing her career technically, she took a sideways step into people management and leadership, managing a team of research engineers specialising in data engineering, data science and software engineering. She then took an opportunity at ASOS as an engineering manager, managing teams of software engineers and QA engineers in the fintech space. Following her time at ASOS, she's recently joined SaaS startup 𝙐𝙡𝙡 as an engineering manager and is paving the way internally for female engineers. Holly has been focusing on driving forward the DEI strategy within engineering at 𝙐𝙡𝙡, from creating a more accessible and diversity-centric approach to their recruitment processes to empowering and connecting with the current female engineers. She has started building a community for female engineers to come together, creating opportunities for sharing challenges and solutions, exploring mentoring opportunities, and focusing on empowerment. Holly, it's great to have you on the show today. Really pleased to dive into your journey and share with our listeners a little bit more about you and the amazing work that you're doing.
Perfect. Thank you so much for having me.
Let's start at the beginning, if that's okay. I think it would be really great to understand a little bit more about you and what was it that sparked your interest in tech and led you to where you are today?
So I always had a keen interest in sort of STEM subjects at school, with sort of problem solving, numbers. So I always knew that was sort of something I was interested in, but I didn't really know what that meant sort of long term. So my mother was a physics teacher, so she was also sort of very much in that STEM space. And I think part of that was her exploring. Part of that conversation was her exploring what else is out there aside from sort of teaching. How can you be a woman in tech that isn't a physics teacher? So pre-university, I'd done sort of the classic STEM subjects at A-level. I literally Googled what degree should I do. So I put in my subjects and I Googled it and it popped out with engineering. So it was very unscientific. And I guess that was kind of pre the world of AI. But that kind of led me down the route of engineering. I looked at universities that I thought looked fun. Swansea's right by the sea, which sounded lovely. So it was sort of a little bit by accident. I think I'd always had that interest in STEM, but never really had that sort of lifelong ambition and passion of exactly the route that I wanted to go down. I was still very much figuring it out and still very much am figuring it out. So after university, it took some time out. I think like a lot of people, we've done a lot of education. All the way having done my master's, I just needed a little bit of time out. So I took a little bit of a career break, so to speak, and I worked as a house parent in an international boarding school, so something completely different. But after a little bit of time of that, I sort of realised that actually, no, I want to go into this space. So I found a grad scheme, joined a grad scheme, and then sort of worked my way from a technical point of view through progressing my career, and then took a pivot and shifted sideways into some leadership stuff.
Perfect. So it was meant to be then, the whole engineering focus. Thank God for Google, I'm assuming, is where you put that kind of search in. Like, what do I do? And great to see that it came out with software engineering and that you was able to enter into that space. As an engineering manager, and obviously you're part of the hiring process and the hiring team over at 𝙐𝙡𝙡, what do you think are some of the biggest challenges still facing women entering the tech industry today? Because we all know that there's a huge amount of work that needs to be done. The dial needs to be massively shifted at that entry level and when we further get up into leadership. So what do you think are the biggest challenges facing women right now?
Representation. I think that kind of goes back to my story as well, that there wasn't that representation around me of what careers were possible. And I think that's the same situation now, is that representation. I think often, some statistics that 32% of women in tech find themselves often being the only person in the room, the only woman in the room. And I think that's really telling, that you can't be what you can't see. And I think if you kind of put that in sort of like a really sort of simplistic terms, if I said to you, I'm going to paint this wall blue, and you have no idea what the color blue looks like, you can't visualize it. But if I said to you, I'm going to paint this wall blue, I'm going to use sort of LinkedIn color blue, you might not know exactly what it looks like, but you've at least got an idea and you can paint a picture in your mind of what that looks like. And I think that's true for sort of women in leadership and women entering tech as well, is if you can't see that representation of somebody that you can connect with or somebody that you identify with, it's really hard to imagine and envisage yourself in that space.
Yeah, and I completely agree with you there. I think I speak to many women within the tech space at various points of their journeys, all the way from classroom students all the way up to women sitting in the boardroom. And what a lot of them say is being able to visualize and see, and that path that's there and that possibility is something that is so key. I think when we look at the women in tech leadership, the women at that entry level, the numbers are starting to lift up. The representation, it seems like there's a bit of a dial shift with kind of graduate level or intern or junior level software engineers. And then when we step up into the more leadership positions, again, that's kind of that next challenge that I think is coming. I mean, both of them are equally a challenge. And if you look at women in leadership positions, particularly in the UK, research shows that, currently 10% of tech leadership in the UK is held by women. So that representation, that you can't be what you can't see, is potentially a challenge that's there and can stop and stifle women moving forward.
I was just going to say that I think part of that as well is that representation also brings in limiting beliefs. If you can't see somebody in that leadership role, then you almost kind of limit that belief within yourself as well. So I think it's great that we're seeing this influx of graduates and those entry level roles, whether that's through sort of boot camps, apprenticeships, whatever that looks like. But if we don't then have that representation moving upwards and bringing those women on that journey into those leadership roles, it's about breaking down those limiting beliefs that they may have.
I completely agree. And I think if we look at companies, so once we're getting the women in, what do you think companies need to do better once they've attracted to the females in, to retain that diverse tech talent, to then ensure that those paths are there for them to see that step into leadership and keep women within the space?
I think you said earlier around 10% of leadership is women, and that's actually fallen this year by sort of 27-28%, which isn't great, right? That should be ringing alarm bells. And I think the question of what should companies do, ask them. Ask the women that you have in your organization, speak to them, engage with them. I think it's really difficult to make a decision about a group of people if they're not represented in the room. So I think there's a lot that the company can do, but I also think there's a lot that we can do for ourselves. I think typically we're not as good at advocating for ourselves, and I appreciate these are sweeping statements, but typically we're not as good at advocating for ourselves as our male colleagues. I think imposter syndrome, I know for me that's something that at times feels like a core personality trait. So I think finding ways to overcome those moments of imposter syndrome, finding the ways to be able to advocate for yourself, celebrate your successes, and sort of champion your achievements in a way that feels authentic to you, that kind of doesn't make you feel like you cringe really hard. I think finding those ways to be able to advocate for yourself is so important, because if you're not advocating for yourself, no one else is going to be.
I completely agree there. I think it's a skill that, as women, I think we need to support ourselves, support each other, to feel comfortable singing our praises. And it's one that's always so hard. And I went to a conference recently and spoken to a previous episode guest as well. And a lot of the themes that were coming out was that power of reflection, that time to stop and look back and celebrate yourself for the successes and the achievements that you've had. And I think as women, we're always so good at getting things done and accomplishing a lot. but then not stopping and saying well done, and then sharing those well dones elsewhere. And I think your advice there on what companies can do as well, I think listening, like asking those women that they've got, and if there's no women in their organisation, finding ways to access women in tech via communities and finding out from those women what those challenges are. Because for some companies, they're just starting this journey and they may not have those women around. And I think getting involved in community is so important, and listening. So I think there's some great advice there that you've shared. If we look at it at kind of from your own personal experiences, obviously you worked at ASOS, you're at Enable now, and you're doing some great work in terms of pushing the gender dial within the organisation. What benefits have you seen firsthand from having a more diverse engineering team? And that doesn't have to be just having just women and men. It could be diversity across the whole board. What does having that diverse perspective really bring?
I think the easiest way to kind of sum it up for me is that you don't get innovation with the same people in the room. And I think having that diversity brings diversity of ideas. And exactly as you said there, like diversity comes in all shapes and sizes. It's not just gender, it's not just race, it's not just background, but it's all of our own sort of uniquenesses that feed into our own personal diversity of thought. And I think that diversity of thought piece for me is really key. And that's a mindset that I've really had to lean into recently, is that yes, I bring diversity by being a woman, but I also bring diversity because of the experiences I've gained from working from other organisations, the fact that I haven't come from a computer science background. All of those things add to my personal diversity of thought. And I think diversity of thought is a nice way to kind of package up all of those differences and capture all those differences that we can bring to an organisation. So yeah, I think diversity of thought brings diversity of ideas. And from a company perspective, right, if you're building something, whether that's a platform, whether that's a product, you want to be building something that your customers want to use. So if 50% of the world is female, arguably 50% of your customers could and should be female. So if you're not building something with those people in the room, it doesn't make sense, right? It's that having those people that are represented as part of that ideation process, as part of those conversations, will ultimately build a better platform, a better product, whatever it is that you're doing, because you've got the right people in the room, you've got that diversity of thought, you've got the innovation in the room, because that's all tech is, right? Tech is innovation, and you don't get innovation with the same people in the room.
Love that. I really like kind of how you've expressed that whole piece there from the benefits of diverse teams. And I think you hit the nail on the head. If you're building a product, a platform, whatever it may be, and it's for the world or for people to use, people are diverse. Our world is diverse. So therefore, those teams that are creating those products, really, if companies want to engage as many customers as possible, and like you said, 50% of the world is women, you need to make sure that you've got that diversity of thought within those teams, so then it can relate and fix challenges that may not be brought to the table if you haven't got that diversity there. So I love that, building it for your actual customers and making sure your team represents that. So it's great to hear. And there's probably companies or hiring managers, founders, HR individuals, other engineering managers and directors of engineering listening in and saying, I really want this diverse team, but it's just a challenge. We just can't seem to make it work, and we just can't bring in this diverse talent that we want. So from your experiences of hiring, what hiring practices have you found most effective, and any advice that you would give from your experiences at ASOS or from Enable of initiatives that you've implemented to help attract that diverse talent?
I think that's a really big question, and I think there's so many different approaches that you can take. But from a gender diversity point of view, I think language is so valuable. I think we're already fighting a losing battle with around about 30% of the entire tech workforce being female. So we're already going to be on the back foot from a statistics point of view. And I think we've all heard that statistic around 100% of women will apply for a job if they hit 100% of the job description, but men only need to hit 60%, for example. And I think we sometimes view that as from a confidence point of view, but I actually think it's down to the language. So I think as women, we've been socialized, we've been conditioned to follow rules. We've been socialized and conditioned to kind of take things at face value. I mean, a perfect example of this is if me and my husband go to IKEA and we buy something flat pack, I guarantee you not once would it cross his mind to use the instruction booklet. He'd bosh it together. It may work, it may not work. But my approach would always be to follow the rules, follow the instructions. So I think this is something actually that one of your previous guests, Emma, mentioned around what you're putting on job descriptions and talking around if you're explicitly saying must have a computer science degree. Typically, women will take those non-negotiable comments for face value. So by just changing how you're writing it, desirable computer science degree, other qualifications considered, completely opens up a new pool and a new scope for other people to join, right? So I think coded language as well is a really interesting thing, that there is male coded and female coded language. And I think reviewing your job descriptions, reviewing your job adverts, reviewing emails that you're sending out to make them as female centric coded language as possible, again, really has very, very negligible impact on the amount of men that will apply for these roles. But from sort of a female perspective, it really opens those doors to get that diversity through the room. I think from a more practical point of view as well, representation in the interview panel, I think this goes back to what we were saying earlier around you can't be what you can't see. So if you in an interview, you're faced with 3 people that you don't identify with, it's really difficult to imagine yourself in that company. Whereas if you've got diversity on the interview panel, whether you've got diversity through your hiring processes, it does make it more accessible to people. And then I think there's, you can go into so many different things, right? There's gender's one aspect, but then from a neurodiversity point of view, making the interviews accessible. I think gone are the days of sort of turning up in a suit, sitting down with sort of 3 people in front of you. That there are ways in which that we can engage with people to make it more accessible. And internally, unconscious bias training, I think, is a really important thing to consider as well from a hiring manager's point of view. How can we be mindful and be conscious of our unconscious bias, and how can we adapt around them?
Love that. So many great examples there in terms of things that you can do, and they're changes that can happen quite quickly if companies are really, key at putting this as a high priority for them. And I think that the piece that you speak about use of language, obviously, Elevate Women in Tech is the community group that I have, but I've worked nearly now for 2 decades in recruitment, and 𝙐𝙣𝙡 very much focuses on underrepresented talent. And it's really interesting. So obviously a lot of the work that I do when engaging women for jobs is via calling them, reaching out to them, connecting with them on LinkedIn. And one of the questions I always ask is, why would you not apply for this job? And a lot of them would be, I don't have a computer science degree, or I don't hit all of those key criteria points, or I've got some of the tech stack, but not all of it. And it's through having conversation and that engagement that actually we get more women and we get more of a diverse slate that goes over to our customers. And just having a, advert out there approach and hoping that these women and underrepresented talent are going to come through is not always the way. It has to be that reach out, and hopefully that may be something in the future that will change, but that's kind of the reality of where we are right now. And I think, your other points as well, companies reviewing their job description, representation, so important. I think if you have that diverse team within your organization, then you must make sure that they are part of that interview panel. I think, like you said, being able to see that there's a path there for you is so important. And then looking at whole host of other things like accessible interview materials, a relaxed environment, an environment where everybody can succeed, and being more aware and more conscious, I think is something that's so important. So really love those tips, and great that you've that you shared those with us today.
The other point around that you were sort of saying there around job descriptions and women maybe not applying because they don't hit all the tech stack. One of my favourite things in I say favourite, I don't mean favourite at all, but one of my favourite things in a job advert says 5 years experience. Like, what does that actually mean? And I think that's something that, again, is a really great example of where language can be so powerful, and it is so important that we're deliberate and we're intentional with it. Just because someone's been doing something for 5 years doesn't mean anything compared to someone who has been absolutely crushing it for 18 months, 2 years. And I appreciate sometimes when you've done things for a long time, it's the repeatability and demonstrating that skill set time and time again. But I think by putting those statements of those sort of non-negotiable statements, you're really opening yourselves up to limiting your talent pool, because we want to tick your boxes.
Yeah, love that. Removing the non-negotiable statements. Yeah, love it. I think we mentioned it a little bit earlier on about, obviously, part of the challenge is attracting women. So, you know, at every level of the process that people are looking at, from entry all the way up to senior leadership and even exec level. But then what companies fail to forget then is that once you've got this diverse talent that you've worked so hard to get in some instances, you've tried many different routes, might have taken months to get the process in place, is then retaining that talent. And I think so much is sometimes forgotten about the retention. And I think if we look at women and women within the tech world, I read on, I think it was an Accenture report, that there's a stat that 50% of women under the age of 35 will leave the tech industry. And I think that is such an alarming stat. And there's a whole host of reasons that sit behind why they're leaving. But I think, you know, once we've got people in, it's about making sure that, yes, you have a diverse team, but you've got an inclusive culture is so important as well. So what do you think companies should do to foster that inclusive culture where women truly want to stay and thrive within their organisation?
I think that statistic around 50% of women in tech leaving before the age of 35 is, exactly as you said, alarm bells ringing. I think that's a huge statistic, and I agree with you. I think there's a multitude of reasons why. And I think it's for everything from kind of the opposite of the challenges that we face of building up our confidence, advocating for ourselves, overcoming imposter syndrome. I think women hit a point within their careers where actually they really lean into their successes. They really start to recognize their skill sets. And we're shouting about it, we're cheering about it, we're advocating for ourselves. But I don't think tech companies are used to us doing that. I don't think they know how to handle that. So we're not getting that progression and that feedback and that outcome that we see our male colleagues getting. So we find a sector, we find a space, we pivot, and we go into somewhere where our skill set is recognised and it is needed and it is celebrated. So I think that's part of it, as well as I think if you think about a woman at the age of 35 where she sort of hit that point where she's really leaning into her success, I think I'm surprised by that statistic, but also I'm not overly surprised as well. But I think in terms of what can companies do to foster that inclusive environment, I think as we said earlier, it might sound super simplistic, but ask them, engage with them. I think have those conversations of what's causing you to kind of look outside of the business, because unless you ask that question, you can hypothesize till the cows come home, right? But until you ask that question, you'll never know kind of the root cause to be able to address those things. But I think things like leadership commitment, a commitment from leadership that this is something we're going to look at, that an inclusive environment, whether that's through your values, whether that's through your KPIs, whatever that looks like for your company, but that commitment from leadership, I think is really important. I think mentoring and sponsorship programs are so valuable. If you're not able to offer them internally, support them externally, whether that's supporting them with someone's time or supporting through the funding. I think we're blatantly aware that we don't have a huge amount of resource when it comes to women in tech in our own isolated bubbles. But when we all come together, there is a huge amount of resource that we should use and we have to use to help elevate ourselves and elevate each other's. I think things like diversity training, I know I touched on unconscious bias training earlier, but I think training around diversity to help those around us be on this journey with us. I think there's a huge amount of stuff that could be done around allyship. I think from like a company perspective, looking at your benefits, are your benefits inclusive? Are you, do you have flexible working that is family friendly? Do you offer family support? Have you got equal pay, equal opportunities? All of those things, and transparency around that as well. I think from somebody looking at going into a company, that's the sort of thing that I look for, is how inclusive, how diverse, and how ahead of the curve is this company from sort of that perspective. Employee resource groups, I think they're also incredibly valuable. I think having that leadership commitment is one thing, but I also think giving those, typically it's those people that are in those minority groups or that feel marginalized, that are the most passionate about these things. So give them the platform to do something about it, right? And I think that there's a lot that the company can do with that commitment from leadership, but part of that is bringing those people, opening those doors for the people that want to make that impact and want to make that change, and encouraging it and supporting it and pushing and driving it forward, removing those blockers. So yeah, I think representation, again, I think you said it earlier, is if you don't have that representation internally, there are so many people outside your business that are willing to give up their time, that want to come in and want to help push that dial, move that dial in the right direction, and continuous learning. I think that's what it comes down to for me, is that continuous learning, a company having a commitment to continuous learning. I don't think it's fair for us to expect companies to get it right 100% of the time, but I do think it's fair for us to expect companies to try 100% of the time. And I think that's the key piece, is that willingness to learn, that willingness to accept that maybe that we haven't got it right all the time, but we're going to do better. I think that continuous learning piece, whether that's from a management perspective, whether that's a training perspective, whether that's looking at our hiring practices, whether that's looking at our benefits, that continuous improvement, continuous learning is so valuable.
Yeah, I love that. And I think it's so important, that continuous learning and that kind of top down, bottom up approach around truly making a change. And for a culture to be inclusive, it needs to come from both ways for it to meet in the middle and to really kind of get that environment right. And I think, like you said,
no, and your culture doesn't sit in C-suite. Your culture doesn't sit with your graduates. Your culture is from your most senior to your least experienced individual, right? So you have to take everybody on that journey. So looking at it from exactly as you're saying, that top-down approach is where you're going to like truly impact culture. And I think sometimes we use the word culture and like, oh, we have a culture of this, but actually it's kind of a buzzword at times. I think it's like, we have a culture of doing things this way, but actually what does that actually look like in real life, in your day-to-day? And I think for something to be a culture, it has to be something that everybody at every level of the business fully has bought into and fully impacts and fully embraces.
100% agree there. I think sometimes with particularly the larger companies, the big corporates, they have what they perceive to be their culture that they're building. But when you come back in and you talk and listen to the people that are living the business, it's not the culture that actually exists. And I think, that openness, that continuous learning, the ever-evolving culture is so important. And there's many ways that you can do it. And you've highlighted so many there, mentorship, sponsorship programs, true allyship, commitment from leadership, truly representing values and making sure that that's woven into the DNA, the golden thread of what that business is about. Looking at like your benefits, transparency around pay. We still know today that in the gender pay gap in a lot of companies is still quite a big gap. And I think companies that truly want to get there, the more open, transparent and kind of openness to share are the ones that will get the culture right. And there's some fantastic companies out there that are doing some fantastic things and learning. If you're on a journey and you're starting this out, don't be afraid to reach out to those companies. One thing I've learned since setting up Elevate Women in Tech is that people love to share, people love to talk, people love to help each other out. And I think the more we can be open to opening up our doors, so to speak, and letting people come in and give that advice, the quicker we're going to start to see that evolution and everything move forward. So thanks for sharing some
That's so true. Sorry, I think that piece as well on the gender pay gap is a really interesting piece for me. I think a lot of it is it's very easy for us to scapegoat companies and be like, oh, companies aren't paying us fairly. But I think actually a lot of the root cause comes from that piece that we've mentioned for about 100 times already, but that women advocating for ourselves. Okay, so that pay is based on the stakeholders around you and their view of you and the impact that you're having and the contributions that you're having, whether that's technical, non-technical, culture, whatever that looks like for you within your space. And I think part of the gender pay gap comes from that lack of advocacy that women have for themselves at times, that we're not shouting about our successes. So although we're doing incredible things in the background, it's in the background. And unless you've got people around you that are supporting you, shouting about the stuff that you're doing, or your managers really championing you, I think that for me hugely feeds into that gender pay gap piece, is that we have to advocate for ourselves and we have to get comfortable celebrating our own successes, because if we don't, no one else is going to.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I love that. I think in terms of our time in the show, we're kind of coming up to the end. So to wrap things up, what I would love to ask you is, what encouragement or parting advice would you give to women that are listening in today who are looking to pursue a leadership role in tech?
Find your cheerleaders. Never underestimate the power of a network. And if you can't find that network internally, go externally. I think having somebody that can hype you up, give you that boost, send you that gift that makes you feel like you're invincible is so valuable. When you are having those moments of self-doubt, when you are having those moments of imposter syndrome, when you are finding that strength from within to advocate for yourself, having that network of strong, empowered women around you, and strong, empowered men, and men that will celebrate you, and allies, is also incredibly valuable. So yeah, find your cheerleaders, and if you can't find them internally, go externally, because they do exist.
Love that. Very much big advocate for finding your tribe, finding those people that lift you up and make you feel good, because life's tough, and it doesn't have to just be in a work environment, it's personal as well. But those people that you can have around you that take you on that journey and support you and cheerlead for you 100%. And like you said, if there's not that employee resource group internally, or that community network internally within your company, because it's small, find somewhere external, find that route where you can build that tribe. And there's so many companies doing great things. Obviously, we have Elevate Women in Tech. We have a community group that we're building. So yeah, if you're looking for a tribe to join, or you're looking for those people around you, by all means, it'd be great to have you on board. Other than that, thank you very much for coming on today and sharing your experiences. Really enjoyed speaking with you, and I'm sure many of our listeners have been able to resonate, connect with you as well, Holly. I think if anyone was open to connecting, I'll share obviously your LinkedIn. But yeah, is there any parting words or anything that you would want to kind of finish off before we close out?
Thank you for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure, and also thank you for creating a platform that gives women in tech a voice. I think that's incredibly valuable for us. So thank you.
Thank you too. And to all of our listeners, thanks again for tuning in for another episode of Elevate Women in Tech. Don't forget to subscribe to the channels that we're on, Spotify, Apple. You can obviously get the information off of our website as well, to ensure that you don't miss any other insightful conversations with trailblazers in the tech industry. And for anybody looking for that tribe to join, please feel free to join our Slack community group as well. And until next time, yeah, it's great having you here, and speak to you soon.